welcome to LaunchLeft, an intentional space for art and activism, a podcast, a label, a launchpad for left-of-center artists. I'm Rain Phoenix. Don't forget to rate and subscribe. Follow us on all socials at LaunchLeft. Today's very special guest is Allison Russell. Please welcome her to the show. Your voice is a revelation. You have such a beautiful singing voice. I would love to ask you how music first found you.
You know, it's just been a part of my forever, like in the womb. My mom is a really beautiful piano player, and she was like a baby when she had me. She was a kid and 17, 18 years old, but she played piano constantly. And we had a really rough relationship. And after I was born, I think she had quite severe postpartum depression and untreated at the time. Schizophrenia, was sort of like the onset of it for her. And she was in pretty severe psychosis in my early times. And so it was rough between us. But what I remember, one of my happiest memories of that early time, which was fraught in so many ways, but this memory was like hiding underneath the piano when she was playing, and she would just play for hours because it was therapeutic for her, I think, really. And I loved listening to her play. So I would just hide under the piano and I could see her feet on the pedals and hear that resonance like underneath the piano itself. And I could feel, even though she couldn't really express her love in other ways, I could kind of hear it in the music, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that was that contributed to an early attachment to music as a transformative way to deal with afflictive emotion and fear?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And that was, my mom and that side of the family are, my grandma came from Scotland, and she knew so many really creepy old lullabies and ballads and like violent lullabies and these ballads that have, that are the kind of, that was my first experience really of encountering the kind of the unwritten archive, the oral archive and the oral tradition archive, and realizing that these were often songs handed down between women, and there was just something about those songs, and I loved them. I loved my grandma's songs, and I loved those stories, and I loved the allegory and the kind of distilled human conditionness of those stories as well. And they were comforting. I mean, some of the most frightening ones were in a strange way comforting to me, because they let me know that other humans through time had gone through things similar to what I was experiencing and survived. And there was, I definitely think, the escape of art was, it was a lifeline. I don't think I would have survived my particular set of circumstances without having that escape.
It's amazing to me, the ones that find that young and kind of, as opposed to, let's say, becoming crazy drug addicts or, going totally negative, they find a positive outlet in a sense.
Find something that doesn't further compound the harm that they've already experienced. Yeah, exactly. And I really think it's like, even if you never make art yourself, to be able to inhabit others' art helps us literally feel less alone. And in my case, it helped me even before I was writing my own songs. Even just reading, like I was an early reader, and I think about what a gift in my life that was. And that's just a random, why does one kid read early and another doesn't? I don't know. For whatever reason, I was an early reader, and having that literal escape of stories, like somewhere to go in my head. And when things were, like my background, it was violence and abuse. And for over a decade, actually certain parts of that started in the foster home, but it was much worse when I got adopted by my mother, whilst I was in foster care, was, married this much older man, an American expat from Monticello, Indiana, which was a sundown town on the books into the 70s, late 70s. And, was raised in a very abusive family himself, was an abused child at one point himself, was raised with white supremacist ideology, which I believe is child abuse. I believe like the kind of bigotry and racism is actually child abuse, just as much for the child being indoctrinated as for the other children they eventually decide are others and lesser than,
Yeah.
It does harm
100%.
all around,
Yeah.
And he carried that with him, the unhealed wounds of the Civil War here. He carried those with him to Canada. And I think, when he adopted me, in his mind, I wasn't totally human, or certainly not an equal human. He believed that because he was brought up in an entire community that believed that, to the point that they didn't let Black people spend the night in their community, for a long, into the 70s, wow. Late 70s, like it's like a real sundown town. And that's like in the Midwest, and like he believed that. He was brought up to believe that, and he was had been abused himself, and was carrying forward that cycle. And wow. I just think about I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't had the outlet of reading, of being able to imagine other worlds or have other people imagine them for me, and then get to sort of play in their mind palaces via the book, via the and in the same way that music and the stories in music did that for me. My grandma's old folk songs like that, those are ancient stories that resonated for me. And I would find, I was a very nerdy child, and I would find lots of fantasy and sci-fi and just ways to escape that felt that really did. They protected my mind, even if I couldn't protect my body, to some degree.
One thing that I know that you eventually were able to do at such a young age was to actually find your way out of that situation physically. Do you mind sharing how you were able to do that?
I don't mind sharing at all. I mean, honestly, it got to the point of, if I stay, then I think he would have killed me, or we would have had a fight where we killed each other. I don't know. It was bad. It was really bad. And I was 15. And it actually, the series of events where he had 2 children from a previous marriage. He's much older. He's almost 30 years older than my mom is. And so he had grown kids, and my eldest adoptive brother had 2 kids when he was very young, close together. And I actually, when I was 14, my eldest adoptive brother and his wife were having issues, and the kids came to stay with us. And I nannied them. I stayed home from school. I did homeschool that year. It was my 8th grade. And I nannied these kids, and it changed everything for me, because it was the first time, that he hadn't been in my bed every night, that I actually was able to, because the kids were staying in my room. And so he left me alone for the first time in my life, and where then I could start to process some things. And my mothering instinct came out in full force, because I had to care for these babies, that my niece was not 1, and my nephew was, I don't know what he was, like 5, not even, he was like 3 months old. They were babies, Wow. And so it was very intense to be thrown into this role of mother, but also it was this relief to not have my adoptive father torturing me every night, and it also made me understand how fucked up what was happening to me was, like, it was like, I've got to get out of here. I'll die, I'm going to die. And I needed to stay strong sort of for the kids. And then when they went back to be with their dad, I knew that I had to leave. I knew that I couldn't stay in that home. And that was one of the hardest things I've ever done, particularly because I have a younger brother, and our home life wasn't as severe in some ways for him, because of my my adoptive father, his biological father, was, he focused his abuse on women, and women and females. Like he was not great to my brother, but he was not being sexually and physically abusive to my brother. But having to leave, even so, just having to leave him in that horrible environment was awful. But I was 15 and he was 7, and I couldn't take him with me at that point,
Yeah.
And so I left, and I remember it was like a huge fight the night I left. And my dog defended me and bit my father, and my adoptive father, I should specify, because I've since met my biological father, and he's a wonderful man, and I don't want any mistake as who I'm talking about. My adoptive father, started attacking my dog, and I had pepper spray, and I pepper sprayed him. And of course we all had to pour out into the street because it pepper sprayed the entire house. And I just ran. I just started running, and I basically never went back. And, wow. But I was in Montreal. I grew up in Montreal, and I'm really lucky on a number of levels. Like Montreal is a very 24-hour city. There was like a cafe that I used to love to go to called the Croissant Royal on Saint Laurent. I don't even think it's there anymore. It's a different business now, but it was a 24-hour cafe, and students from the McGill ghetto would like play chess there all night with old guys that were in there playing chess who would just, drink coffee all night and play chess. And I would go there and play chess, and I would wander around on the mountain when it was cold. I sometimes would sneak into the oratory or the Notre Dame Basilica and pretend to pray and just like nap on a pew, And I went to this alternative high school called Mind, Moving in New Directions. And there was a student lounge there. They would open usually an hour before classes, and I would go and sleep on the couch in the student lounge. And then I also, not long after leaving home, met my first love. And she was so kind, and she would, I would peck on her basement window and she would let me in. I mean, that's what the song Persephone is about. On winter nights, she saved my life, because you can't live outside in Montreal in the winter or you die,
So you were going to the same school you were going to when you were living with your abusive stepfather. Yeah. You just stayed going to that school, but then you just were homeless, basically.
I was homeless, and I didn't tell anybody.
Unhoused.
I'm sure there was. I was so ashamed of all of it. It took me years to even talk about it. Yeah. It's so interesting to me whenever stories of other survivors coming forward, and there's always the chorus of voices that say, well, why didn't you say anything then? Why didn't you charge them? Why didn't you call the police? Why didn't you do that? It's like, well, I was 15 and I had been abused and brainwashed for a decade. And I also loved that man. That he was also the only father I knew. And I was brainwashed for a decade. And it takes a long time to deprogram to the point where you can then charge that person if you ever get to that point, Yeah. And for me, I did get to that point. It took me 5 years. I left home at 15, and I didn't charge him until I was 20 years old. And the only reason he pled guilty to the charges are that other women came forward that he had also violated.
Wow.
And that's the only reason. So he did plead guilty. He did go to jail for 3 years. It was a 3-year sentence. He could have been out in 9 months.
Oh my
and when you think about the kind of sentencing that they give for nonviolent, marijuana related crimes in a lot of places here in this country, it lets you know, like, okay, how are we valuing our children actually,
Yeah, especially female children too.
Especially female children, exactly.
Females in general.
In this case, the judge said, one of the things he said was it was a light sentence because he pled guilty. And therefore, if he pled guilty, that was showing remorse, even though, of course, it wasn't. It was his lawyer saying, this is how you get a lighter sentence, Okay. And the judge also said, and you're relatively unscathed. Those were his words. Wow. And by that, he meant I'm not drug addicted, and I am not involved in prostitution. That's what he meant by I am unscathed, because those are the statistical probable outcomes for a lot of women that have the same history that I have, and or similar histories.
Wow.
And I thought, isn't that interesting? But if I were to if that had happened, if I had met, exactly what you were talking about, if I hadn't had the outlet of music, if I hadn't met the friends with love in their hearts and the chosen family that I met, if all of those things hadn't happened for me, then very likely my outcome would have been self-medicating or prostitution or who knows what, And when I was young and desperate, and I was just incredibly lucky to have found a community that uplifted me and, showed me that there was such a thing as kindness in the world. Like, I was lucky for that. But had I had a statistically probable outcome, then I would have had no credibility, and he would not have even been found guilty, So it's like you're I thought, isn't that interesting? How does this judge know that I'm unscathed? Because outwardly, because I can hold down a job or something like that means I'm fine,
Right. Yeah, I want to go back to something you said about, being ready to process things, and the important, like my own personal experience with the death of my brother, and how time is nonlinear, and that you don't really experience grief or the things that we all need due to trauma at the time, maybe that what you're supposed to, right? Or like why is there shouldn't really be any time limits on trauma. That's so courageous and so brave at that age, to have done that.
My hand was forced, in a sense. What the catalyst was, so when I left home at 15, I was, sort of homeless and couch surfing for a while, sometimes sleeping in the graveyard in the summer and various things like that. But then when I was 16, I moved in with 3 other women that I met at my school who are dear friends to this day. And I got a horrible telemarketing job so I could pay the rent, and, was finishing high school and doing a year of what's called Cégep in Montreal, which is like a junior college, basically. And realizing that, pre-med health sciences and dissection of fetal pigs probably wasn't for me after all. And, figuring that stuff out. And when I was 17, I moved across the country. I went from Montreal to Vancouver, British Columbia on the West Coast. And, and part of my move was that I just needed physical distance from him, from my adoptive father, because he was sort of stalking me around the city and showing up places, and it was, I just wanted to get far enough away that I wouldn't have to see him, And so I went to Vancouver, and I'm connected with my mom's older siblings who lived there, and a community of musicians, and sort of came out of the closet as a songwriter in Vancouver, and, in my late teens. And when it wasn't until I got a call from my mom when I was 20, and she told me that she had gotten a job, and that she was going to be leaving the grandkids, my adoptive niece and nephew that I had nannied. My mom had been doing some nannying for them as well. And when she went back to work, she said she was going to leave them with my adoptive father. And I had like a full body, like breakdown, panic attack, freak out, where it was, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that he would do to my niece what he'd done to me if I didn't stop it, and that it would be on me too, because I knew. Wow. I knew what he does. I know what he does, and I know he's a compulsive reoffender. And it was like I had been telling myself this doublethink lie of like, it's fine, he's not hurting other people, it was just me, even though I knew that wasn't true on another level. But it's like exactly what you're talking about. I couldn't process it. I couldn't face it. It was just denial, you know. And when I got that call from my mom, I was on the floor. I was like, it's going to be on me. I'm going to be just as responsible if I don't do something at this point. And so it forced me to, I had to fly back to Montreal. I had to go to a police station and stand in line, you know, with the guy whose car got broken into and the woman who lost her driver's, you know, her whatever, lost her purse. And it was like, had to stand in that line. And then I had to go up to the thick bulletproof glass and talk and, you know, sob out what had happened to me to this man. It was like, I remember this, like, his being completely expressionless, staring at me, you know, and then eventually they assigned me to like essentially like a special victims unit, like the detective that was going to work on the case. And I remember him sitting me down and saying, well, this is 5 years ago. There's no physical evidence anymore. I have to tell you that the vast majority of these cases don't end in conviction. And, you know, are you sure you're up for this? And I told him, like, this is the situation. He's going to do it again if he hasn't already. And I have to try and stop him.
Wow.
Will starting this process stop him? And the detective said, yes, once he's under investigation, he won't be allowed to be alone with children. And so
Awesome.
For me, it was like, that was it. That was worth it for that. Even if he never got convicted, at least I could disrupt the potential harm.
Thank you for being one of those artists and one of those transformers. It's so important to highlight and discuss these stories and to be the storyteller that you are, that you're willing to share your story and that you do it through song and through such a beautiful body of work as your record. First of all, if there's anything you really want to share about the record.
While it's a solo record and while it's obviously an autobiographical record, it is so much that recording, what you're hearing is this joyous assembly of some of my most beloved chosen family and friends and artists that I admire, who came together. We actually recorded it in early October of 2019 or late September of 2019. And it was around Americana Fest here in Nashville. We all happened to be home. And I found out earlier that month that I had received a grant from the Canada Council of the Arts to do an exploratory sort of writing and demo work. But I had basically, Outside Child, these songs came out in a fever. Like, I think they were a lifetime sort of gestating, but then they were like born over the space of 3 months. Between July 2019, when I was on the road with Our Native Daughters, I started writing the first one on the Our Native Daughters tour bus and finished writing. My partner, JT, and I, my life and creative and writing partner, many of the songs on this record, JT Nero and I were finishing Joyful Motherfuckers like the day we were going into the studio. And I just think that is the story. And I was so, you know, part of the legacy of abuse for me as a survivor has been a very deep fear of putting myself forward in any way. And so the notion of doing like a solo record or a career under just my own name was like unthinkable to me for years and years and years. I was always felt much more comfortable being able to blend in with and disappear and sort of just be part of the collective of various bands that I've been in. And so it was a terrifying proposition. In fact, I was still in some denial about that's what I was about embarking on, you know, even as we were going into the studio. But I was so excited to get to make music with people that I love and admire and who, exactly as you say, like they're uplifters. They uplift me and they uplift what I'm doing. And they heard these songs and they just believed that it was important to record them and get them out there too. And they uplift me. We were crying and laughing in the studio every day. We did those songs in 4 days. The sort of the bed tracks and my singing, and then the Yola and Erin Ray and Ruth Moody and the McCrae sisters and I overdubbed the harmonies. And the next, sort of on the fifth day, at Dan Nobler, who produced the record at his home studio. But we recorded at a studio called Sound Emporium, which is run by an amazing woman, Juanita, and it's got a very deep, storied history. Like there's songs in those walls, and so many artists that I admire have made music there and kind of just imbued that place with the spirit of creativity and community. And we felt that. We felt that every day that we were there, and I felt that every day recording these songs. It was a joyful. It was painful, obviously, some of it to sing, but it was also just an incredibly joyful experience to be surrounded by this community and to know that how far I have come from that time when I felt like I couldn't go on living, that there was nothing to live for, to this getting to become a mother myself, getting to be in this joyous community. My daughter came to the studio every day, and was like dancing in the control room while we were tracking. I mean, it was just Dan, his beautiful son, Dan Nobler, who produced the record and plays on it. His little son, Willoughby, and his amazing wife, Carrie, would come every, and visit. And there was like family in the control room. We were just like laughing and crying. And I hope that can be heard, that just joyful communion that we experienced in recording it. I mean, each of those songs we recorded maybe 3 times. And we usually took the second take, except Fourth Day Prayer, which was the hardest song for me to sing. And that took 4 takes, actually. And we took the 4th one for Fourth Day Prayer. But I would never dream of telling any of those artists what to play or sing. Like it was generosity and their artistic contributions that uplifted me and those songs and helped me to feel safe to sing that story and tell those stories. And so that's what I want people to know about the record. And Montreal, which is the song I think that you're about to play, is this record, as much as it's a kind of like a remembrance, it's a reclamation. It's trying to come to a place of forgiveness for myself more than for anyone else, to not, because that carrying forward that sort of anger, and it hurts. That hurts me more than it will ever hurt him, I've come to see him with compassion and empathy as a survivor who didn't have the magical circle of friends that came to sort of help me recover and learn that life didn't have to be these cycles of abuse, that there was life beyond that kindness and love and real equality are possible, with the people that in our lives. And no one taught him that. And so he's very sick. He's a very sick person. And trying to come to a place of forgiveness, and Montreal is really a love song in a lot of ways to my city, but and also a love song to the scared, hurting, broken kid that I was, trying to sort of be a mother to because as you say, it's not linear. Like that child still exists somewhere, you processing grief, processing different things in our life. It's not linear. It's like the multiverse. It's these overlapping realities, and that reality is somewhere. And I'm trying to mother that kid a little bit, I think, through this song and pay my respects to her because she didn't respect herself for so long,
Yeah, well, bless, because you came in with a lot of generosity, regardless of the trauma you experienced and the things that happen. Is like your spirit. So hopefully, it will influence others to do exactly that. It's so important that we use our gifts to uplift and inspire, regardless of whatever happens to us, right? So, yeah. I mean, ideally, that's how we change the world, right? I think. I believe.
I believe it too. It's these baby steps, because we are more than the sum of our scars, and we do have this mysterious gift, this ability to transform and to transcend and to imagine something better, even if we've never experienced it. Like what a gift to have that activism of our imaginations,
Mm-hmm.
And And then it can change reality, like everything. You're exactly right. Anything, any sort of innovation or progress or healing thing that's ever happened starts as a leap in someone's imagination, you know?
Yeah.
That this is possible. And then it becomes reality, you know? It's so lovely to meet you. And I am honored that you had me on the show. Hi there. This is Allison Russell. And this song is called Montreal. It's from Outside Child. And you are listening to Launch Left.
Oh, my Montreal, can I dream of you tonight? Of before the fire, your rose, your azure light. Oh, you cathedrals, your shadows felt like love lines. I was your child, Montreal. You would not let me come too high. To reminisce on the times before there were just so few of them. The jackal came and spring took me when I was still so young, so young. The mind of a child has oceans wide and 1,000 millenniums, and the city was my sky and stars, les fenêtres de l'infini. J'étais si vieux, j'étais si jeune, j'étais si jeune, si vieux. Les yeux de l'enfant voient tout, voient tout, voient tout, voient tout, tu sais. La lumière d'appeler sur les arbres, la pourriture dans la plus blanche mare, la sagesse bouleversante, la sagesse cœur brisant. La sagesse de l'enfant, cœur brisant, cœur brisant. Oh, my Montreal, can I dream of you tonight? Before the fire, your rose, your azure lights. Oh, you cathedrals, your shadows felt like love and arms. I was your child, Montreal, you would not let me come too high. Oh, my Montreal, can I dream of you tonight?
LaunchLeft aims to create an intentional space that highlights and empowers all artists for whom radical creativity is not a choice, but a necessity. LaunchLeft begins with music, but its ultimate aim is to launch left-of-center artists in all creative fields.